The first time Elena Marquez heard someone whisper that Adrian Volkov was a gigolo, she laughed it off as cruel gossip, the kind that always clung to powerful men like smoke. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it began to grow the night she saw him step out of a black luxury car in downtown Manhattan, impeccably dressed, calm and dangerously handsome, with a woman twice her age clinging to his arm as if she owned him, her diamonds flashing under the city lights. Elena stood frozen across the street, the cold biting through her coat while confusion burned inside her chest, because this was not the man she thought she knew, not the quiet stranger who had helped her when her cafe was about to close. Not the man who listened when she spoke about her late mother and her dreams of a better life. Not the man who looked at her like she was something rare in a world full of cheap things. And yet here he was, smiling politely at that woman, opening her door, whispering something that made her laugh as if she had paid for that laugh. And in that moment Elena felt small, foolish, and painfully naive. Adrian Volkov was known in the city as a myth wrapped in tailored suits, a shadow businessman whose name was spoken carefully. But to Elena he had just been Adrian, the man who ordered black coffee and never stayed too long, the man whose eyes carried stories he never told, and she had trusted that silence, she had believed it meant depth, not deception. Rumors moved fast in her neighborhood, and soon they reached her ears with sharper edges, people saying he was kept by wealthy women, that he sold charm instead of loyalty, that he played roles for money while hiding something darker underneath, and Elena tried to ignore it, telling herself that people lied because they were jealous, because they didn't understand him. But every unexplained absence, every late-night message left unread, every time he appeared with a new expensive watch or cufflinks chipped away at her certainty until trust felt like glass about to shatter. The truth was Elena had already fallen for him, quietly and completely, without permission or protection, and love made her blind in ways she hated to admit, because when you love someone, you rewrite reality to keep them pure, even when the signs are screaming at you to run. Adrian, on the other hand, lived by rules carved from blood and loyalty, rules Elena knew nothing about, because Adrian Volkov was not just a man with secrets, he was the head of a criminal empire inherited at 26 after his father's execution-style murder, a mafia boss who ruled with restraint and calculation, a king who wore the mask of a gentleman to survive in a world that devoured weakness, and the women Elena saw were not lovers but shields, alliances disguised as romance to protect her from a truth that would put a target on her back. The night Elena finally confronted him, the rain poured hard against the pavement, washing the city into streaks of light and shadow as she waited outside his private residence, her hands trembling not from the cold but from the fear of what she might hear, because sometimes answers hurt more than lies. And when Adrian opened the door and saw her standing there with tears in her eyes, something flickered across his face, panic, maybe regret, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by calm authority as he invited her inside, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. She didn't waste time with small talk, didn't soften her words, because pain had sharpened her courage, and she asked him directly if everything people said was true, if he was really just a man who sold himself to the highest bidder, if she was just another illusion he entertained when it suited him. And for the first time since she met him, Adrian lost control of his expression, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening with something close to anger and something far more dangerous, hurt. "You thought I was just a gigolo," he said slowly, his voice low and deadly calm, and the way he said it made her stomach twist, because it didn't sound like a joke or a denial, it sounded like disbelief that cut deeper than shouting ever could, and Elena's silence was answer enough, her broken expression confirming that she had doubted him, that she had believed the worst. And that was when Adrian realized that hiding the truth had cost him the one thing he never planned to want, her trust. He turned away from her, pacing the room like a man trapped by his own choices, knowing that telling her everything could destroy her, but letting her walk away believing he was nothing more than a paid companion would destroy him. And Elena watched him, torn between love and self-respect, unaware that the truth waiting behind his next words would shatter her heart in ways she could never undo, because the man she accused of being a gigolo was something far more dangerous, and loving him was never going to be safe. Adrian stopped pacing and stood with his back to Elena, his hands braced against the edge of the marble counter as if the weight of his own name had suddenly become unbearable, and the silence stretched so long that Elena began to wonder if she had already lost him, if this confrontation had been the moment where everything ended, because sometimes people don't leave by walking out, they leave by shutting down. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, stripped of its usual control, telling her that the city loved simple stories, that it needed villains and playboys and gigolos because those labels were easier to swallow than the truth. And Elena listened with her heart pounding, unsure whether to believe him or prepare herself for another lie. He turned to face her slowly, his eyes searching her face not with seduction but with caution, as if he were deciding whether she was strong enough to carry the burden of who he really was, and he asked her a question instead of giving an answer, asking her if she had ever noticed how he never touched those women in public beyond what was necessary, how he never stayed the night anywhere except alone, how his life moved in patterns of discipline rather than pleasure. And Elena hated that he was right, hated that the memories rearranged themselves into something that didn't fit the gigolo narrative she had built in her pain. Adrian told her that every woman she had seen him with represented an agreement, not intimacy, alliances with families who wanted access, protection, or peace, women who wore luxury like armor and smiled like predators, and he admitted that letting her believe the rumors had been a mistake born of fear, because fear had been his constant companion since the night his father died. The night Adrian inherited not just power but enemies, blood debts, and a throne soaked in violence. Elena felt the room tilt as he spoke of his past, of growing up learning how to read threats before emotions, of being taught that love was leverage and honesty was a luxury that got people killed, and suddenly the man she thought was emotionally distant became someone forged in survival, and that realization hurt more than any betrayal, because it meant his lies weren't casual, they were necessary. He confessed that meeting her had been an accident he never planned for, that her small cafe had felt like neutral ground in a world that was always hostile, that with her he could pretend to be normal for an hour, and that pretending had slowly turned into wanting something he knew he couldn't afford, and Elena felt tears spill over because she recognized that tone, the one people use when they talk about dreams they already know they'll lose. Still, pain made her brave, and she told him that explanations didn't erase how small and foolish he had made her feel, how standing in the rain watching him with another woman had broken something inside her, how trust once cracked never returned the same, and Adrian absorbed her words without defense, nodding as if punishment was something he deserved, because in his world accountability was rare, and he wasn't going to cheapen her pain by denying it. He told her that being seen as a gigolo was safer than being known as a mafia boss, that ridicule protected him better than fear in certain circles, and that if people underestimated him, they didn't look closely enough to notice who was disappearing or why deals were always honored when his name was mentioned, and Elena shivered at the calm way he said it, realizing that violence lived just beneath his composure, controlled but ever present. She asked him why he hadn't just walked away from her if she was such a risk, and that question seemed to strike him hardest, because he admitted that he tried, that he stayed distant, limited their time, avoided touching her too deeply, but that every time she smiled or spoke about building a future on her own terms, he felt something dangerous, hope, and hope was weakness in his line of work. Adrian then did something that truly frightened her. He apologized, not with words alone but with vulnerability, telling her he should have trusted her with the truth sooner or left her before she could fall in love with a lie, and that he understood if she never wanted to see him again, because loving him meant standing too close to a fire that burned everything it touched. Elena realized then that the betrayal wasn't just hers, it was mutual, because she had judged him without knowing the battlefield he lived on, and he had underestimated her strength by assuming she couldn't handle reality, and that shared fault hung between them like a fragile bridge. When she asked him directly if he loved her, his answer came without hesitation, and that scared her more than any gun or threat ever could, because love from a man like Adrian Volkov was not a promise of happiness, it was a warning, and as thunder rolled outside, Elena understood that her heart had shattered not because he was a gigolo, but because the truth meant choosing between a safe life without him or a dangerous love that could change everything, and she didn't yet know which choice would destroy her more. Elena did not answer Adrian's confession right away, because some truths demand silence before they can be touched, and the storm outside seemed to mirror the war inside her chest as she walked toward the window, needing distance even though part of her wanted to collapse into his arms and pretend the world wasn't as sharp as he had just revealed it to be. And as lightning flashed across the sky, she wondered how many lives had been changed by that calm man standing behind her, how many secrets his hands carried, and whether love could survive in a world where survival itself came at such a high cost. Adrian watched her carefully, reading every shift in her posture, because in his world hesitation was often more dangerous than refusal, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady but fragile, telling him that love could not exist where fear ruled, that she couldn't be another hidden thing in his life, another secret tucked away for protection, and Adrian understood that demand instantly, because secrecy had been his armor for too long, and taking it off felt like stepping into gunfire unarmed. He told her that if she stayed, there would be no half-truths, no illusions, that he would give her honesty even when it was ugly, even when it terrified her, and that promise felt heavier than any vow she had ever heard, because honesty in his world could cost lives, not just feelings. Elena turned to face him, asking him to start now, asking him to tell her exactly what kind of man he was when the lights were off and the doors were closed, and Adrian didn't soften the answer, explaining that his empire ran on loyalty and consequences, that he prevented chaos as much as he enforced order, that he had blood on his hands not because he enjoyed it but because mercy was often mistaken for weakness, and Elena felt her stomach knot as she realized that loving him meant accepting parts of him she would never be able to change. He told her about the night his father was killed, about being forced to identify the body while men twice his age waited to see if he would break, about how grief had been a luxury he couldn't afford, and how power had been thrust onto him like a weapon he never asked for. And Elena saw then that Adrian's control wasn't arrogance, it was survival refined into habit. She asked him if he had ever wanted out, and for the first time he smiled sadly, admitting that he dreamed of it sometimes, of a quiet life where no one knew his name, where coffee shops weren't monitored for threats and love didn't come with contingency plans, and that dream had worn her face long before he ever admitted it aloud. The intimacy of that confession made Elena's eyes burn, because it placed her at the center of a future he had never allowed himself to want, and that kind of love was terrifying, the kind that demanded sacrifice without guarantees. Adrian then warned her of the price, explaining that staying with him would mean being watched, protected, limited in ways that would feel like a cage, even if the bars were made of concern, and Elena bristled at that, telling him she had never asked for protection, that she had built her life alone after losing her mother, and that independence was the one thing she refused to surrender, and Adrian accepted that challenge with respect, telling her that strength was the very reason he had tried to stay away. The conversation shifted when a call came through on Adrian's phone, his demeanor changing instantly as he listened, his jaw tightening in a way Elena now recognized as danger, and when he ended the call, he told her that one of his alliances was under threat, that someone was testing his boundaries, and Elena felt fear ripple through her, not because of violence itself, but because she now understood how quickly his world could bleed into hers. Adrian asked her to leave for the night, not as dismissal but as protection, and the fact that he didn't command her but asked told her more about his feelings than any declaration could, and she agreed reluctantly, knowing that distance might give her clarity even as it threatened to pull them apart. As he walked her to the door, he stopped her, his hand hovering near her cheek but never touching, telling her that whatever she chose, he wanted it to be free of illusion, that he would not chase her or manipulate her decision, and Elena nodded, tears slipping free as she realized that the man she had accused of being a gigolo was offering her something far more dangerous than charm, respect. Stepping out into the night, Elena felt the weight of choice settle on her shoulders, because now she knew the truth, and ignorance could no longer protect her, and somewhere deep inside, she sensed that walking away might save her life, but staying might define it, and neither path promised peace, only consequence. Elena barely slept that night, because once truth enters your life, it refuses to stay quiet, and every time she closed her eyes she saw Adrian standing in that dimly lit room, not as a powerful mafia boss or a misunderstood stranger, but as a man balanced between duty and desire, and by morning she understood that distance had not weakened her feelings, it had sharpened them, forcing her to confront what she truly wanted rather than what felt safe. She went through her routine mechanically, opening the cafe, greeting regulars, smiling when required, but her thoughts kept circling back to him, to the way he had asked instead of ordered, to the way his honesty had cut deeper than any lie. And as the day wore on, she noticed something she had never seen before. Two men across the street who did not belong, who watched without pretending not to, and suddenly Adrian's warnings no longer felt abstract but painfully real. Fear crept in quietly, not as panic but as awareness, the kind that makes you straighten your back and scan every shadow. And Elena realized that simply knowing Adrian had already changed her reality, pulling her into a world where danger didn't announce itself loudly but waited patiently. That evening, a black car appeared outside the cafe after closing, and her heart raced not because she expected romance, but because she sensed consequence, and when Adrian stepped out alone, his expression grave but controlled, she felt a strange mix of relief and dread, because his presence meant both protection and escalation. He told her he had come not to persuade but to inform, explaining that her being seen with him the night before had not gone unnoticed, that curiosity in his world often led to tests, and Elena felt anger flare beneath her fear, anger that simply caring for someone could turn her into leverage, and she told him she refused to live as a liability, that she would not disappear quietly to make his life easier. Adrian listened, truly listened, and then surprised her by agreeing, telling her that if she chose to walk away publicly, cleanly, it would send a message that she was not part of his affairs, and if she chose to stay, then she would do so openly under his protection, not hidden in shadows, and the weight of that choice pressed down on her harder than any threat could. Elena asked him what he wanted, not as a boss or protector, but as a man, and his answer was honest and dangerous. He wanted her beside him, not behind him, wanted a life where he didn't have to pretend indifference when she entered a room, but he would not trap her with his desire, because love earned through fear was not love at all. The tension between them thickened, not with passion but with gravity, because both understood that whatever decision she made would ripple outward, affecting more than just two hearts, and Elena realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the refusal to let it choose for you. She surprised herself by asking to see his world, not the violence, but the structure, the people who depended on him, the reason his name carried weight, and Adrian hesitated only briefly before agreeing, knowing that transparency was the only foundation strong enough to hold what they were becoming. Days later, he took her to a charity gala hosted by one of his legitimate enterprises, a place where power wore polite smiles and danger hid behind crystal glasses, and Elena felt eyes on her the moment she stepped inside on his arm, measuring, judging, calculating, and she understood then that public presence was its own form of courage. Adrian introduced her not as an accessory but as someone who mattered, someone he respected, and that subtle distinction did not go unnoticed, because whispers followed them, curiosity sharpening into something closer to concern, and Elena held her composure even as her heart pounded, refusing to shrink under scrutiny. Throughout the night, she observed Adrian carefully, seeing how he navigated conversations with precision, how a single look could silence a challenge, how restraint rather than aggression commanded the room, and she realized that the man she loved was not defined by violence but by control, and that realization shifted something inside her from fear toward understanding. However, the illusion of safety shattered when a woman approached them with a smile that never reached her eyes, congratulating Adrian on his new companion, emphasizing the word in a way that felt like a warning, and Elena felt the threat beneath the politeness, recognizing that some people would never accept her presence as neutral. Later, as they left the gala, Adrian told her quietly that alliances were being tested, that her appearance had forced certain lines to be redrawn, and Elena surprised both of them by saying she did not regret it, because hiding would have broken her faster than standing tall ever could. Standing under the night sky, she finally made her choice, not with certainty, but with resolve, telling Adrian she would stay, not blindly or obediently, but consciously, aware of the risks and unwilling to be diminished by them, and Adrian looked at her with something dangerously close to awe, because in a world built on fear, she had chosen him with open eyes, and that choice bound them together more tightly than any promise, even as unseen enemies began to take notice. Choosing Adrian did not bring Elena peace, it brought clarity, and clarity came with consequences that unfolded quickly and without mercy, because once her decision became visible, the world Adrian had warned her about stopped watching from a distance and began to move closer, testing boundaries the way predators test fences, and Elena felt that shift in small but undeniable ways. Phones that rang and went silent, strangers who asked harmless questions a little too carefully, suppliers who suddenly hesitated before extending credit, and she understood then that power did not always announce itself with threats but with pressure designed to bend you slowly. Adrian adjusted immediately, increasing security around her cafe without turning it into a fortress, making it subtle enough to protect without humiliating her independence, and when she confronted him about it, he didn't deny it or justify it, he simply told her that safety was not control and that he would remove every measure the moment she asked, and that restraint reassured her more than any promise ever could. Their relationship settled into something intense but grounded, built on conversations rather than fantasy, where Elena asked questions and Adrian answered honestly, even when the answers were uncomfortable, and she learned that leadership in his world meant constant vigilance, constant calculation, the burden of knowing that one mistake could cost dozens of lives, and loving him meant accepting that sometimes his silence was not distance but duty. The first real test came when a minor conflict escalated into a deliberate provocation, a message delivered not to Adrian directly but through Elena's business, when a shipment was delayed intentionally and a polite apology carried a hidden insult, and Adrian's response was swift but measured, resolving the issue without violence while making it unmistakably clear that Elena was not to be used as leverage, and Elena saw then how power could be exercised without cruelty, how authority did not always require blood to be effective. Still, the strain showed in quieter moments, in the way Adrian's sleep grew lighter, in how his eyes tracked exits automatically, and Elena found herself learning his rhythms, understanding when to speak and when to let silence do its work, realizing that love sometimes meant patience rather than reassurance. One evening, Adrian took her to a place he had never brought anyone before, a modest apartment far from his usual residences, where he had lived briefly after his father's death, and the simplicity of it shocked her more than his wealth ever had, because it revealed a version of him untouched by power, a young man forced to grow up too fast, and when he told her that this was where he decided never to let fear make his choices again, Elena understood why he had respected her decision so deeply. It mirrored his own. Their bond deepened not through grand gestures but through shared resolve, through Elena refusing special treatment and Adrian respecting that refusal, through disagreements handled with honesty rather than dominance, and yet the calm they built attracted attention from those who thrived on imbalance, because stability in Adrian's world was often mistaken for vulnerability. Whispers began to circulate that Adrian Volkov had grown soft, that love had dulled his edge, and Elena heard those rumors echo back to her through distant channels, each one cutting sharper than the last, not because they insulted her, but because they underestimated him, and she realized that her presence was no longer just personal, it had become political. The danger crystallized when an old rival resurfaced, a man Adrian had once spared in the interest of peace, and mercy returned now as a challenge. When that rival made a public move designed to force Adrian's hand, counting on hesitation where there would be none, and Elena watched Adrian navigate the crisis with cold precision, choosing a response that reasserted boundaries without escalating into chaos, and she saw that love had not weakened him, it had clarified what he was protecting. Afterward, when the threat was neutralized and the night finally quieted, Elena confronted the fear she had been holding back, admitting that she was scared not of him, but of losing herself in his world, and Adrian listened, then told her something that changed everything, that if she ever felt herself shrinking, if she ever felt less than who she was, she should leave, and he would never follow, never punish, never retaliate, because love that consumed identity was just another form of violence. That promise became their anchor, the line neither would cross, and Elena realized that trust was no longer fragile glass between them, but tempered steel forged by truth and choice. Yet even as they stood together stronger than before, Elena sensed the calm was temporary, because enemies rarely retreat forever, and in choosing Adrian openly, she had stepped into a story that would demand more courage than she had ever imagined, and as she looked at him, this man once dismissed as a gigolo, now revealed as something far more complex and dangerous, she knew that love had not shattered her heart after all, it had reforged it, preparing her for the storm that was already on its way. The following weeks tested Elena in ways she could never have anticipated, because stepping fully into Adrian's world meant that every decision, every gesture, even every smile, could be scrutinized, twisted, or weaponized against her. She discovered that living alongside a mafia boss was not about glamour, but about constant awareness, the subtle pulse of power running through every interaction, every movement, every whispered word, and she realized that love in this world was never just emotional, it was strategic, a careful negotiation between vulnerability and survival. Early one morning, a delivery arrived at her cafe, unremarkable at first glance, a simple envelope marked with a seal she didn't recognize, and when she opened it, the message inside was chilling in its brevity: "You are too close. Step away or suffer the consequences." Panic clawed at her chest, but she hid it immediately, knowing that Adrian's world required composure. When she called him, he answered almost instantly, his tone measured yet sharp, and she sensed the shift in him the moment he realized the threat was directed not at him, but at her. He arrived within the hour, and Elena watched him move through the streets as if the city bent to his presence, men stepping aside without question, car doors opening, eyes meeting his and recognizing the subtle danger he carried, a warning wrapped in perfect manners, and she felt both awe and fear, knowing she had chosen a life that demanded courage she had not yet fully measured. Once inside the safety of his penthouse, Adrian did not berate her for the threat, nor did he scold her for the fear he knew she had felt. Instead, he explained the layers of their enemy's tactics, how whispers, intimidation, and subtle manipulation were often more effective than direct confrontation, and how her very existence in his orbit was now a point of leverage. He told her that the envelope was meant to test her resolve, to see if fear would push her away, and Elena realized with a sharp twist of anger and pride that she was not about to be pushed aside. Over the next days, Adrian began a series of measures to protect her that were quiet but thorough. His people surveilled the streets near her cafe, scanned digital communications, and subtly ensured that anyone who might threaten her understood the risk without her knowing the full extent of it. Elena noticed the changes, though, extra security cameras, unfamiliar faces around the block, but Adrian never acknowledged them directly, trusting that her instinct would tell her she was being watched, and Elena felt both frustration and gratitude. She didn't want to feel caged, but she understood that safety in his world was not optional, and she resolved to adapt rather than complain. During one particularly tense evening, they attended a formal gathering at one of Adrian's business partners' estates, a sprawling mansion with marble floors and chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars. It was the kind of event designed to impress, to signal wealth and influence, but Elena noticed immediately that it was also a battlefield. Every handshake, every casual smile, carried undertones she had never experienced before. When she accidentally lingered too long near a man who had once been an adversary to Adrian, his hand brushed hers, a subtle but unmistakable warning, and she understood without words that her presence could be dangerous if she didn't remain aware. Adrian's eyes found hers across the room, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding, and she felt a mix of pride and fear, knowing she had been trusted to move in his world without faltering. Later that night, alone in the car as they left the estate, Elena asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the threat. "Do you ever worry I won't be able to handle this?" Adrian glanced at her, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second, before the mask of control returned. "Every day," he admitted quietly. "But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to keep going despite it. You've shown me you have that courage." Elena wanted to protest that she wasn't prepared, that she didn't belong in this life, but his gaze was unwavering, steady as a lighthouse, and she realized that he believed in her more than she believed in herself. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of their lives settled into a tense but stable pattern. Elena learned to navigate the subtleties of Adrian's world, the subtle power plays, the unspoken threats, the alliances that demanded observation more than action, and she discovered that her own instincts were sharper than she had imagined. She could sense when a glance was more than polite, when a compliment masked calculation, when someone's words carried hidden danger, and each correct interpretation reinforced her confidence, reminding her that love in Adrian's world required both heart and mind. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly over the city, she sat with Adrian in his office, a room lined with books and artifacts that told stories of power and history. The glow of the city lights painted long shadows across the walls, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. She reached for his hand, a gesture of solidarity rather than possession, and he didn't hesitate to take it, entwining their fingers naturally, a silent promise that neither would face this life alone. "I thought I could protect you by keeping you at a distance," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "But I realize the only way to protect you is to be honest, to let you choose knowing everything." Elena nodded, tears brimming, because she had always feared the truth, and yet now, understanding it, she felt a strength she had never known. Their intimacy deepened not in passion alone, but in shared understanding, in the quiet moments where trust and respect were paramount. Adrian revealed pieces of himself he had never shared with anyone. The early nights spent negotiating with enemies who underestimated his youth, the sleepless hours planning for contingencies that could save dozens of lives, the constant weight of responsibility that never lifted, and Elena realized that she was not just loving a man, she was bearing witness to a life lived on the edge, a life where every decision had consequences far beyond his own happiness. Then came the day when a more serious threat emerged. A rival faction, emboldened by Elena's presence in Adrian's life, made an aggressive move, testing his control. The confrontation was swift, a display of power that was frightening in its precision, yet Elena watched, unafraid, because she now understood that fear alone did not define him. She saw strategy, control, and resolve, and she realized that choosing to stay meant embracing both danger and loyalty, accepting that love with Adrian Volkov was never simple, never safe, but always profound. As they returned home after resolving the incident, Adrian looked at her in the quiet of the car and said, "You knew what you were choosing. This world isn't safe, but you chose me anyway." Elena's heart tightened at the weight of his words, understanding fully that love in this life required courage far beyond romantic notions. She whispered back, I know. And I'd choose you again, even knowing everything. Adrian smiled, a fleeting warmth in his otherwise controlled expression, and for that brief moment, the world outside, the threats, the dangers, the enemies, faded away, leaving only two people who had chosen each other against all odds. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing the city in a deceptive calm, but both knew that this calm was temporary, that the life they had chosen carried storms yet to come, challenges that would test both heart and spirit. Yet Elena felt stronger than ever, because she had faced fear, known truth, and embraced love with her eyes wide open. In choosing Adrian Volkov, she had not only accepted a man but a world, a legacy, and a destiny intertwined with both peril and passion, and she knew, without doubt, that her heart, though once shattered by doubt, was now unbreakably committed. The weeks that followed brought a fragile rhythm to Elena's life, one where danger and affection coexisted in ways she had never imagined. Living alongside Adrian Volkov was not merely a matter of love, it was a test of endurance, of wit, and of courage. She had learned to read subtle shifts in behavior, to sense when someone's polite smile masked malice, and to trust her instincts even when they conflicted with the man she loved. Yet, no matter how attuned she became to his world, there were moments that caught her off guard, moments that reminded her of the fragile line she now walked between safety and peril. One afternoon, while walking through the city streets with Adrian, a man approached them with an air of confidence that immediately set her on edge. His smile was friendly, almost too friendly, and Elena felt the familiar tightening in her stomach that signaled danger. Adrian, calm as ever, subtly shifted between her and the man, his presence alone demanding deference, yet Elena saw the glint in his eyes, the calculation, and understood that he was already assessing the threat. The man spoke casually, complimenting Elena on her cafe and making small talk about the city, but Adrian's gaze never left him. The moment stretched, tension coiling like a spring, until the man excused himself with a polite nod, leaving Elena shaken but more aware than ever of the invisible forces around them. She realized that every interaction, no matter how ordinary it seemed, carried potential consequences in Adrian's world. That evening, back in the safety of his penthouse, Adrian watched Elena as she unpacked groceries from her small weekly shopping trip. He studied the subtle fatigue in her eyes, the way her shoulders carried tension that had become second nature since she had entered his life. He walked over and placed a gentle hand on her back, a grounding touch that said more than words ever could. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly, "and yet, I don't want you to bear this alone." Elena looked up at him, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting in her eyes, and she realized that for all his control, for all his danger, Adrian's concern was never possessive, it was protective, born of respect and love rather than fear. She nodded, allowing herself to lean into him for a moment, and in that brief connection, she felt a kind of intimacy she had never known, a merging of worlds, a shared understanding that transcended words. The following days tested her resolve in new ways. Adrian's enemies, always watching for weakness, sensed her growing influence and began subtle maneuvers to unsettle both of them. A business partner who had once been neutral suddenly withheld vital information, creating tension that threatened to escalate into a full-blown confrontation. Adrian, ever strategic, approached the problem with a precision that left Elena both in awe and afraid. She watched as he negotiated, not with threats alone, but with the careful manipulation of perception, turning potential aggression into compliance without a single blow being struck. It was in these moments, Elena realized, that the true power of Adrian Volkov revealed itself, the ability to control chaos without succumbing to it, the skill to wield influence with subtlety rather than force, and the discipline to remain calm even when the stakes were life and death. One night, after a particularly tense day involving a rival faction's failed attempt to undermine his authority, Adrian brought Elena to the rooftop of his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath them, glittering with lights that hid both beauty and danger. He stood close, his arm brushing hers, and she could feel the tension between them, a combination of relief, adrenaline, and unspoken desire. "You're learning," he said, his voice low and warm, "but the world you're stepping into, it doesn't forgive mistakes." Elena nodded, the wind tangling her hair, realizing that she had already made mistakes simply by entering this life, yet she had no regrets. She had chosen love, truth, and partnership, and she knew that Adrian would never allow her to face danger unprepared. Their bond strengthened not only through shared challenges but through moments of quiet connection, where the noise of Adrian's empire faded into whispers and glances. Elena learned that his strength was not just in his power but in his ability to reveal vulnerability selectively, trusting only those who earned it. When she asked him about the women she had once seen, the rumors that had haunted her early days, he answered with honesty, explaining alliances, protection, and strategy, never dismissing her questions, never expecting blind faith. In doing so, he earned her unwavering respect, for trust in Adrian Volkov's world was never given, it was tested, earned, and maintained through action. Yet, despite her growing confidence, fear remained a constant companion. She could never fully relax, never fully forget that each day carried unseen threats. One evening, while returning from a charity event, their car was tailed by an unmarked vehicle. Elena's pulse quickened, but she maintained composure, following Adrian's lead as he maneuvered through the city with uncanny precision. When the tail finally disappeared, he allowed himself a small exhale, glancing at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You handled that well," he said, "but you must always be vigilant. The world we live in is unforgiving." She nodded, absorbing the lesson with both fear and admiration, recognizing that in choosing to stay, she had accepted a life that required constant awareness, courage, and unwavering loyalty. Their love deepened through these trials, not through grand gestures or romantic fantasies, but through shared resilience. Adrian revealed pieces of his past he had never shared with anyone else, the nights he spent negotiating under threat, the constant vigilance required to maintain alliances, and the sacrifices he had made to protect those he cared for. Elena, in turn, shared her own vulnerabilities, her losses, and her fears, creating a bond that was both intimate and unbreakable. They learned to communicate through subtle cues, a glance, a touch, a shift in tone, and in these moments, the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, united by choice, trust, and the willingness to face danger together. Then came the day that would test the limits of their bond. A former ally of Adrian's, embittered by past grievances, attempted a coordinated attack designed to destabilize him personally and professionally. Elena, though terrified, remained by his side, her presence a silent statement of loyalty and courage. Adrian handled the confrontation with cold efficiency, neutralizing the threat without unnecessary violence, and yet, when the danger had passed, he turned to her, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "You've proven yourself," he said, "not just to me, but to this world. You belong here, with me, as much as anyone." Elena felt a surge of pride and love, understanding that belonging in Adrian's world was not about wealth, power, or status, it was about resilience, intelligence, and the courage to choose him despite everything she now knew. As they returned to the safety of the penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath them, Elena realized that the journey was far from over. Choosing Adrian Volkov meant accepting a life of constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and occasional danger, but it also meant experiencing a love deeper and more profound than she had ever known. She understood that every challenge they faced together strengthened their bond, that each trial was a testament to their commitment, and that the man she had once doubted as a gigolo was now the center of her world, a man whose complexity, strength, and vulnerability she had come to cherish completely. That night, as snow fell softly across the city, covering the streets in a fragile blanket of calm, Elena and Adrian sat together in silence, hand in hand, hearts beating in quiet harmony. The world outside would always be unpredictable, full of hidden threats and whispered dangers, but within the walls they shared, they had forged something unbreakable, a love born of truth, respect, and choice, tempered by courage and bound by loyalty. And in that moment, Elena knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, unshaken, unafraid, and undeniably united. The morning after the snowstorm, the city sparkled with a deceptive serenity, a silence that promised calm but carried the lingering tension of lives lived on the edge. Elena woke early, as was her habit now, and found Adrian already in his study, reviewing documents and plans with the precision that had become as familiar to her as his voice or his presence. She watched him for a moment, noting the subtle lines of fatigue on his face, the way his fingers moved confidently across the papers, and the quiet power in his posture, a man who carried not just wealth, but responsibility, danger, and the weight of a legacy that demanded respect. She approached him quietly, placing her hand on his shoulder, and he looked up, a faint smile breaking through the controlled mask he always wore. "Morning," she said softly. "Sleep well as one can in this world," he replied, his tone casual but layered with meaning, and she understood immediately that even here, in this supposedly safe moment, vigilance never truly rested. The day unfolded with a mixture of routine and subtle tension. Elena visited her cafe briefly, checking on employees, restocking supplies, and ensuring that her life outside Adrian's empire retained a semblance of normalcy. Yet, even in the familiar comfort of her small shop, she felt the ever-present undercurrent of observation, the knowledge that every decision, every movement, could ripple outward in ways that mattered to more than just her. Adrian arrived later, not to supervise, but to accompany her, a gesture that was protective yet unobtrusive, and Elena felt the familiar comfort of his presence, a reminder that despite the dangers, they were in this together. Customers and employees noted his quiet authority, the way his gaze commanded respect without intimidation, and Elena realized anew that part of loving Adrian was acknowledging the world he lived in, a world that demanded strength and awareness from anyone who chose to share it. That evening, they received word that a potential alliance, one that Adrian had been negotiating for months, had become unstable. A rival faction sought to exploit Elena's connection to him, sending a message that was both a threat and a test. Adrian did not panic, he never did. Instead, he strategized, calmly outlining contingencies, delegating responsibilities, and ensuring that Elena remained both informed and protected. She listened closely, absorbing every detail, understanding that her presence was no longer incidental but integral, and she realized that trust in this world was not passive, it required engagement, awareness, and the courage to act when necessary. Later, as they walked through the streets under the soft glow of streetlights, Elena asked the question that had been weighing on her mind for weeks, "Do you ever regret letting me in? Bringing me this close?" Adrian paused, considering her question carefully, and then said, "Every day, in some ways. The closer someone gets, the more they can be hurt. But regret? No, you've shown me loyalty, courage, and understanding that most people could never manage. I can't imagine facing this world without you." Elena felt her heart tighten at his words, the blend of honesty, respect, and love making her realize that she was not simply his companion, she was his equal in courage, his partner in a life that demanded constant vigilance. The night deepened, and a subtle tension returned as they approached the location where the rival faction's agents had been observed. Adrian remained calm, his hand brushing hers in a silent acknowledgement of solidarity, and Elena felt a surge of both fear and determination. When the confrontation occurred, it was swift and precise, a display of power that required no unnecessary violence but made the consequences of misjudgment unmistakably clear. Elena remained close, observing, understanding, and occasionally assisting in small but significant ways, her presence reinforcing the bond they shared and the partnership they had forged. The rivals withdrew, recognizing that Adrian's control over his domain was absolute, and Elena felt a strange exhilaration, a mixture of relief and pride, knowing that she had stood by his side and faced danger without flinching. Returning to the penthouse, they allowed themselves a brief respite. The city outside remained alive, unaware of the subtle battles fought and won, and in that quiet moment, Adrian turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You've changed this world for me," he said. "Not by stepping into it blindly, but by choosing to understand it, to endure it, and to remain by my side. I never imagined anyone could do that, and yet you have." Elena, overwhelmed, realized that love in Adrian's life was not sentimental, it was forged in trials, sharpened by danger, and solidified by mutual respect and courage. She felt a depth of connection she had never experienced before, a bond that was unbreakable not because it was easy, but because it had been tested repeatedly and had endured. In the following days, they continued to navigate the challenges of Adrian's world together, each decision measured, each interaction deliberate, each choice weighted with consequence. Elena found herself growing in ways she had never anticipated, more confident, more perceptive, more aware of the subtle dynamics that governed power, influence, and loyalty. She began to anticipate threats, to understand strategy, and to engage with a clarity that impressed even Adrian, who often commented on her instinctual understanding of the world he inhabited. Their partnership, forged in danger and truth, became both a source of strength and a symbol of unity, demonstrating that love could exist even in the harshest of environments when built on respect, honesty, and courage. The culmination of their journey came one evening when they faced a final, coordinated challenge from an ambitious adversary seeking to destabilize Adrian's empire. This time, the stakes were higher than ever, with the potential for significant loss and irreversible consequences. Yet, Elena, fully aware of the risks, stood by his side, her hand in his, her presence a tangible testament to the trust and partnership they had cultivated. Together, they confronted the challenge with precision, strategy, and an unyielding determination that left their adversaries with no option but retreat. The victory was quiet, not celebrated with fanfare but acknowledged in the simple, profound understanding of shared accomplishment and survival. After the danger had passed, Adrian and Elena stood together on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the city that had tested them repeatedly, the skyline a reminder of both the challenges they had faced and the life they had chosen. "We've come a long way," Adrian said softly, his hand brushing hers. "Not just surviving, but understanding, trusting, and choosing each other in a world that rarely allows such choices." Elena nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, recognizing that the journey had been as much about self-discovery and courage as it had been about love. She whispered, "I wouldn't change a moment of it." Adrian smiled, the weight of past burdens easing slightly in the quiet of their victory, and for the first time, the world outside seemed momentarily still, as if granting them a brief sanctuary in which to savor their bond. That night, as they finally retreated into the safety of their shared space, Elena understood fully that her heart, once shattered by doubt and uncertainty, was now unbreakable, strengthened by truth, resilience, and love forged in adversity. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, that danger and intrigue would always be part of their lives, but she also knew that whatever storms came, they would face them together, fortified by trust, loyalty, and the unshakable bond they had chosen to create. The man she had once doubted, whom she had once believed to be a mere gigolo, was now the center of her world, a complex, powerful, and profoundly human man who had trusted her with the truth and with his life, and in return, she had chosen to stand beside him, unwavering and resolute. As snow began to fall again over the city, Elena and Adrian sat together, hands entwined, hearts beating in quiet synchrony, knowing that love in their world was never simple, never safe, but infinitely more powerful for having been tested. And in that moment, they understood that they were not defined by fear, by rumors, or by the dangers surrounding them, but by the choices they had made, the courage they had shown, and the unbreakable trust that bound them together, proof that even in a world of shadows, love could endure, survive, and flourish.